Salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. My dad worked in the timber industry his whole life. His father was a logger, and he grew up in and around the woods. My dad started his own logging company when he was 18. He has owned and operated a shake and shingle mill from Oregon clear up to Thorn Bay, Alaska. He's an intelligent man and holds over a dozen patents for various pieces of equipment that he has designed and built over the years. He's employed dozens of people over the years, all of them spending extensive time in the wilderness. When I was a boy, I remember hearing bits and pieces of conversations among some of the men at the mill. Although nobody would tell me directly, I understood that something had gone on before I was born, and it involved one of the foremen, John. They weren't joking around, they were genuinely afraid, and would not talk about it with a kid. When I was young, my dad wouldn't tell me about it because I would often go out into the woods cutting blocks with him on the weekends. He did not want me to be afraid of the woods. While I was speaking with him last weekend, I told him a couple of strange events that happened to me later in the wilderness, and it reminded me of the hints at the story I had heard when I was a boy. After some prodding, he told me the following story. In the mid-60s, my dad owned a large roofing product mill in Aberdeen, Washington. He had teams of men that would cut the fallen old-growth cedar salvage left after the logging operation. He had permits to salvage a large amount of wood in the coastal areas of Gray Harbor County, primarily in the area around Copeless Beach. Several of the men on his cutting crew lived in and around Copeless Beach. His foreman, a man that I will call John for the story, was a bright, down-to-earth hard worker. My dad trusted him with thousands of dollars of vehicles and equipment, as well as the safety of his crew. He was not the kind of man to make up stories. Monday morning, sometime in July, John was several hours late to work. This was highly unusual, as he was always there early, getting the saws and trucks ready for the day. My dad said he was visibly shaken up, and when he asked him what was wrong, he asked my dad if he could go in the office so the others would not hear him. They went in and sat down, and John simply said, "Something destroyed our house this weekend." My dad thought he said someone broke into the house and asked if John knew who that someone was. John said, "You don't understand. This was not a person. It was, I don't know what it was, but it completely trashed the house. The family is going to stay with my brother in Alma for a while." My dad asked him to explain what had happened. John said that when he got home from work Friday evening, his youngest son, Tim, who was around 4 at the time, told him that he saw a big cow man walking at the edge of their field that afternoon. He thought the boy meant cowboy because some of his neighbors wore cowboy hats when they were out in the sun. He asked him if the man was wearing a cowboy hat, and the boy said, "No, Daddy. He is a cowman, furry and stinky like the cows." He asked his wife if she knew what he was talking about, and she said Tim was playing on the porch that afternoon when he came running in and said the cowman was stuck on the fence. He was very excited, so she went out to see what he was talking about. She said she opened the door. She was hit by a horrible smell like wet dog and garbage. Tim was pointing across the field opposite of their house. He got loose. She looked where he was gesturing and could see the top strand of the barbed wire bouncing up and down, as if somebody had just pulled on it really hard and let go. She did not see the cowman and noticed nothing out of the ordinary except for that smell. She told Tim to come inside and play for the rest of the day. She felt uneasy and a little scared. Their older son, John Jr., who was 12 at the time, was at a friend's house and walked home a short while after Tim had seen the cowman. He told her somebody had followed him home, walking in the woods right off the side of the road. He never saw who it was. They never left the woods, but he said it was a very large man. He would hear large sticks cracking, and footsteps were very heavy. Once he got to the driveway of their house, where the woods stopped at the field, where his brother had his sighting, the footsteps stopped, and John Jr. never saw anything. He was pretty shaken up by the event and wanted his dad to go out to the woods and check it out with him. Later that evening, John strapped on his .357 and took his older son into the field to have a look. They first walked to the area where the cowman was supposedly stuck on the fence, and walked down the fence line looking for anything. They came across this large clump of long reddish-brown hair tangled on the top strand of the barbed wire. He tried to pull it off, but it was really tangled up. So he pulled out his buck knife and sawed it off. He said the hair was over a foot long, really coarse and stringy. There appeared to be a bit of flesh matted in the clump, and the top wire was pulled loose from one of the posts. Whatever was hung up on the fence was very large. He handed the hair to his son to hold, and they climbed through the fence and walked toward the woods. He said he was looking for any sign of track on the ground. The hair kind of looked like it was from a horse's mane or tail. The ground was solid, grassy field. There were no hoof prints or any kind of tracks that he could see. The edge of the woods began about 10 feet from the fence line. They entered on a small game trail that deer frequented. It was around 8 at night, and the woods were getting fairly dark. They walked for a ways and soon began to smell the rotten garbage, wet dog odor his wife had reported. John said that he had got the feeling like they were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck was standing up. He told his son that they should head back before it got really dark. The boy agreed. As they began walking back out, they could hear heavy footsteps off to their left. They stopped. The footsteps stopped. They walked on nearly to the clearing, and John whispered to his son, "Run like hell to the house," on the count of 3. John Jr. nodded, and John whispered 1, 2, 3. Gave his son a push on the back to get him started, then spun around and raced off the trail in the opposite direction toward the footsteps with his gun drawn. Off the trail, the underbrush was dense with fern and brush. He had a hard time making any headway, but as he got closer, he could hear it moving away from him deeper into the woods. At this time, he told my dad that he thought it was a vagrant camping out in the woods and possibly scoping houses out to rob at night. John was a big man and capable of taking care of himself in most any situation, and he had a large caliber handgun, so he wasn't too worried about confronting a vagrant in the woods. He was a few yards off the trail in a deep brush when he heard the movement stop just ahead of him. He stopped to look and listen, and thought he saw movement by a large tree, like someone was trying to hide. He leveled his gun and said, "Come out nice and slow, or I swear to God I'll come back there and shoot you." It was silent for a moment, and then he caught movement out of the corner of his eye, spun around to his right for a better look. He said it looked like a huge bear moving through the brush. He could only see bits through the dense ferns, but it was moving quietly away from the tree on 4 legs. It was about 15 feet away from him. At first he thought it was a bear, and then suddenly he saw a huge hairy arm with a human-like hand reach out of the brush and grab a small alder tree. The tree was about 4 inches in diameter, and it grabbed a hold of it about 5 feet up. He said it happened so fast it was a blur, but the thing pulled itself upright out of the brush holding the tree and stood on 2 legs, turning its upper body to glare at John. It was enormous. He could not believe how bulky it was. He said it was well over 7 feet and at least half that big through the chest. It was too dark to make out any features, but its eyes seemed to glow a deep red, and he could see its teeth, like it was curling its lips back. It stood for a brief moment, then lunged ahead, pushing back on the tree with tremendous force. The tree snapped loudly and crashed into the trees around it, getting hung up in the branches and not falling to the ground. It then disappeared into the deep brush with frightening speed, sounding like a bulldozer with no engine sounds. John stood there in shock, his gun temporarily forgotten. Then he realized it was heading toward his house, the way his son had just gone. He turned to run on the trail, hoping to gain ground on it. Cut it off before it reached the clearing. He hit the trail and ran as fast as he could toward the clearing, all the while hearing the creature thrash through the brush on his side. He burst into the clearing and looked frantically about for his son. John Jr. was standing just inside the fenced field, waiting for his dad. John screamed at him to run for the house. Then he saw the thing crash out of the woods about 50 feet to his left. It crossed the 10-foot clearing and stepped over the fence in 2 strides and was running through the field parallel to his son in a matter of seconds. John screamed at his son to run faster. He took aim at the creature. He did not fire because he was afraid to hit his son or the house. So he vaulted over the fence and ran in pursuit of them. He could see it angling toward his son and knew there was no way his body would make it to the gate before it cut him off. In desperation, he pointed the gun to the ground at his side and fired as he ran, hoping to scare it. It veered more sharply toward his son and put on an enormous burst of speed. He heard his boy scream as they seemed to collide. He saw the creature dip its shoulder down a little bit, and suddenly John Jr. was airborne. He flew about 10 feet, then hit the ground rolling. The creature never paused. It continued to run at an amazing speed in a loop back toward the woods. Once the line of fire was cleared, John stopped and squeezed off the remaining 5 rounds at the retreating creature. He was pretty sure all shots went wild. The creature never made a sound or slowed down, and was soon over the fence and back into the woods. He reached his son, who was shaken up but not physically hurt. He asked his dad if that was a bear. Apparently, little John was so busy running for the house that he didn't see the creature running after him. He said something big and black suddenly ran into him. He felt a huge paw hit his bottom, and he said he went flying. John pulled his son to his feet, and they ran through the gate into the house and locking the door behind them. They were both out of breath and white as ghosts. His wife was screaming at him, demanding to know what gunshots were for and if they were all right. When he caught his breath, he told her to make sure the back door was locked. He was going to call the sheriff. He went to the phone and began to dial the number. This was before 911. Then stopped and wondered what exactly he was going to say. He hung up the phone, realizing what an idiot he would look like if he told the sheriff the boogeyman just chased him out of the woods. He told his wife that it was a large animal, possibly a bear. He didn't know how to begin to tell her. Their 4-year-old was right. His cowman was real, and it was more frightening than anything he could imagine. He told them to keep the doors locked and stay away from the windows. At around 10 o'clock that night, both boys were in bed, and John and his wife sat down to watch the news. They soon heard a moaning cry loudly, kind of like a siren on the volunteer fire department. It would stretch out for a long time and end in this whooping, growling, snarling sound. It was coming from the woods opposite of the house. His wife asked, "What the heck is that?" John answered truthfully, "That's Tim's cowman." He then described to her in full detail what happened, and she immediately wanted to call the sheriff. He persuaded her that they would sound crazy and that he'd handle it himself. She reluctantly agreed and told him that she didn't want either of the kids to go outside until the thing was gone. The howling went on until around midnight, when it finally got quiet. John wanted to stay up throughout the night and watch over the house, but he had a long day at work and the excitement earlier had worn him out. They went to bed around 1 a.m. and had no further problems that night. They slept in that morning. The boys were already up watching cartoons when they got out of bed. The first thing little John said was that he heard the bear rubbing against the house last night. He said he was too scared to get up and tell his parents, so he fell back to sleep after. Then Timmy said the cowman talks funny. This stopped John cold and asked his son, "When did you talk to the cowman?" Tim replied, "Last night in my room." John asked, "The cowman was in your room?" "No, Daddy. He's too big for my room. He talked to my window," Tim said, and turned back to the cartoons. "What did the cowman say, Tim?" John asked. "He talks funny. I don't know what he said. He talks like ooh, ah, ah, ooh," Tim said, and started to make strange monkey-like noises. "Did the cowman try to get into your window?" John asked, breaking out in a cold sweat. "He's too big for that. He made funny faces. He has Lincoln log teeth," Tim said with a smile. John later learned Tim meant that it had square teeth and looked the same size as the small blocks in the Lincoln log set. It apparently spent quite a while talking and making faces outside of the boy's window. Tim said it lie down and went to sleep outside, and he could hear it snoring. John walked to his younger son's room and cautiously peered out of the window. "No sleeping cowman." John told the boys to get dressed. They were going to visit their uncle in Elma for the day. After his wife and kids left, he called one of the men from his crew and asked him to come over. "I'll call him Patrick. He was an ex-state patrolman, and my dad said he was kicked off the force because of his drinking. He was a good worker and never got drunk before dark, so John figured they would have most of the day to look for this thing." When Patrick arrived, John greeted him at the door. "You up for some hunting?" Seeing how it wasn't hunting season, Patrick told him he doesn't poach and doesn't even want to know about it if John does. John told him it wasn't deer he was after and went on to explain the previous night events. Patrick didn't really believe him, but he could see that John was sincere and still shook up. John had his pistol and a bolt-action .30-06. Patrick had a .38 in his car, and John loaned him a 12-gauge. They first circled the house looking for any signs of the nocturnal visitor. At the back of the house, there was a big spot for a garden hose, and it always leaked. There was a patch of ground, worn, bare grass under it. It had turned to mud. In the center of the mud, there was a huge, clear imprint of what looked like a bare human foot. John said it was at least 18 inches long and very wide. It was so clear that he had gotten the feeling that they were on purpose. They found no other prints around the home. In place in the woods or field where a track could be made, the creatures seemed to avoid them. Off to the side of the track in the mud were 4 straight lines, about 8 inches long. He said it looked like someone had raked their fingers through the mud. When they circled around the side of the house and got to Timmy's window, they saw what it was for. Above the top of the window, a good 7 feet up, there were 4 muddy streaks, and on the window itself were a dozen of large, muddy fingerprints. The glass wasn't cracked or broken, just smeared with mud. By this time, Patrick was fast becoming convinced something strange had indeed happened the night before. Before going out into the woods, John wanted to feed the family's pigs. They had 2 of them, apparently fairly young, weighing around 40 pounds each. The pig pen was about 100 yards away from the house behind an old barn. As they got closer, John became concerned because they couldn't hear them making any noise. Usually they squeal like crazy when they know their food is coming. But this morning it was completely silent. They rounded the corner and the pen was empty. No sign of damage or struggle. The pigs were just gone. They searched the barn but found nothing out of place, so they decided to hit the woods and try to kill this thing. They entered on the same trail John and John Jr. had used before. John showed Patrick the broken fence wire and told him about the hare. It was a bright summer morning. John was surprised at the difference from the previous evening. The night before had been still and silent. Now the woods were alive with birds and small animals. He showed Patrick the broken tree, and they followed the creature's trail and found several more large trees twisted and broken. They could see large, faint impressions of footprints where the ground was soft. They followed the deer trail further into the woods and encountered nothing unusual. By noon, they were both getting hungry, so they hiked back to the house for lunch. They spent the rest of the day poking around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just before dark, his wife and kids drove up. He and Patrick were sitting on the porch with their guns, watching the woods. His wife asked if they had seen anything. John told her about the footprint in the mud and the mud on the window. Patrick had retrieved a pint of booze from his car and was well on his way to getting smashed. John decided he didn't want a frightened drunk with a gun around his family, so he suggested Patrick could go home. Nothing was going to happen anyway. Patrick agreed and drove off. John continued to watch the woods. His wife brought out a plate of food and a Coleman lantern and a flashlight. He told her he would stay out here and watch the house through the night. Before they went to bed, he went into their bedroom with the help from his wife, pushed the king-size bed as far from the window as they could. They agreed that his wife and kids would all sleep in that bed for the night, and he would keep watch around the house. She had grown up hunting and knew how to handle a gun as good as him, so she insisted on keeping the shotgun in the room with them. He agreed after making her promise to ask for a name before shooting anything. If it replied, "John, please don't shoot it." There was a full moon that night, and John could see across the field and into the inky dark woods. The night air was filled with the sound of 1,000 crickets, and the pond behind the house was full of croaking frog. As the moon rose higher, clumps of weeds in the field began casting sinister shadows, and before long John was seeing big hairy creatures sneaking up on him. He stood up, lit a cigarette, trying to shake the fear and concentrate on the task at hand. As he smoked, he wandered to the end of the porch and stood looking at the darkened barn. Something was different, but he couldn't quite place it. The front of the barn, facing the house, was open, and the moonlight was hitting it from the side, casting the interior in deep shadows. He stood watching the black opening as he finished his smoke, thinking about the missing pigs. He then realized what was wrong. All the crickets and frogs had gone silent. It was quiet as the inside of a mausoleum at night. He could hear the minute shrill buzz of his own nervous system. As he turned to walk back to his chair, he thought he saw movement in the barn. He looked intently at the opening and could make out nothing. Then he turned his head a bit to the side and saw what looked like two red eyes hovering about 8 feet off the ground. He couldn't see them if he looked straight at them, but when he averted his eyes just a little, they became clear. They were a deep, burning, coal red, almost invisible in the dark. Every few seconds, they would disappear when the creature blinked. His heart began thudding in his chest, and he waited for it to leave the barn. As he approached the house, he slowly backed to his chair, never looking away, and picked up his .30-06. He walked back to the end of the porch and watched and waited. He stood looking at the blinking red eyes for what seemed like hours, and then the eyes blinked out and never came back. He watched intently, but could see no movement. He thought for a moment, then grabbed the flashlight and shined it at the barn. The flashlight was far too small to penetrate the darkness of the barn from that distance. He had to get closer. He was none too keen about leaving the relatively safety of the porch and confronting the glowing-eyed monster in his barn, but he was damned if he was going to live in fear in his own home. He left the porch and began slowly working his way toward the barn, taking his time. Building his courage up, he got closer and could see no movement. It had gone further into the dark. He got within 20 feet of the opening, and his flashlight would now penetrate the gloom of the barn. He moved the feeble beam of light over the contents of the barn, an old tractor, an old pickup, boxes and buckets. Too many places for something to hide, even something big. He cautiously walked closer, now shining the flashlight down the barrel of his rifle. He stopped at the entrance, shined the light all over. Searching the corners and under the vehicles, he stepped into the barn, every sense straining for sound or movement. He walked around the pickup, tensing for a huge hairy arm to reach out and grab him at any second. He made his way clear to the rear of the barn without seeing anything and slowly turned around to leave. He felt both relieved not to have encountered it in the dark barn and frightened, that somewhat confused about where it could have gone. As he was walking out, he glanced at the wide stairs leading up into the hayloft and froze. He knew with complete certainty that it had climbed those stairs and was waiting for him to walk out under the hayloft and jump down upon him. He couldn't move. He was literally frozen in fear. He swore he could hear the floorboard softly creak above him as the enormous weight edged stealthily closer to the edge. He stood with his heart pounding in his ears, unable to move or act. Suddenly, there was a booming explosion of a shotgun from the house, followed by his wife screaming. His paralysis broke, and he bolted out of the barn toward the house, completely forgetting what may have been in the hayloft. As he ran toward the home, he heard an inhuman roar coming from the woods behind his house. It sounded pissed off and in pain. It screamed again, and he heard branches breaking as it plowed through the forest, thankfully away from the house. He got to the house and almost knocked down the front door in his hurry to get inside. He ran down the hall to their room and found his family huddled together on the bed, sobbing. One of the windows was blown out, and his wife was still pointing the shotgun at it. When he burst into the room, she swung the gun in his direction and screamed, and he hit the floor. He waited for the blast, but it didn't come. He slowly stood up, and she put the gun down, and he went to the bed. He asked her what had happened, but she was too shook up to answer. Timmy started to cry. "Why did you shoot the cowman, Mommy? Why?" John Jr. had his face buried against her shoulder, crying. After they calmed down a bit, he told them to get up and follow him. He led them to the living room. They went out the front door and looked around carefully. He could see no sign of it. All was quiet again. He told them to come out and get in the car. They ran out in their PJs and piled in the car. He got in and drove them to his brother's home in Elma. On the way there, they had calmed down enough to tell him what had happened. She said a couple of hours after they went to bed, she finally dozed off. She was awakened by Timmy talking to someone and this bizarre clicking, chirping sound. Timmy was not in the bed. He was standing in front of one of the windows. The moonlight was shining through both windows, illuminating the room pretty good. But there was a large shadow, like a tree obscuring the window in front of Timmy. She knew there were no trees close enough to cast a shadow. She told him to get away from the window. "Mommy, listen. The cowman can sound like a bird," Timmy said, pointing excitedly at the window where the dark figure was standing. "Timmy, get away from the window," she said, trying to keep her voice quiet. Right after she spoke, the noises from outside changed. It went from a soft chirping to a strange gibbering, almost like a human speech, with the occasional pig-like snort thrown in. At this time, little John woke up and said, "What is that?" rather loudly. This seemed to incite the creature, and it hit the side of the house with its fist hard enough for the wall to tremble. At this, little John screamed, and Tim yelled, "Quiet! You're going to scare him away." She yelled at Tim to get away from the window again, and reached up on the headboard and grabbed the shotgun. She got out of bed and started toward Tim. The creature leaned down and looked straight in at the window at her. She screamed, raised the shotgun, afraid to shoot because of her son. It was too close. She started forward to grab Tim, and there was an explosion of glass. A gigantic, hairy arm with claws reached through the window toward her son. She screamed again and fired over Tim's head, blowing out the rest of the window, hitting the creature with double-aught buck. It jerked backward out the window and disappeared into the dark. A few seconds later, she heard it screaming in the woods. "It was trying to get Tim. It was trying to grab my baby." She started crying again. He comforted her as best as he could while he was driving. They stayed the rest of the night and the following night at his brother's home. He told his brother about what had happened, but he could see he didn't really believe him. He agreed to ride back to John's house with him early Monday morning before work. They had left the front door open in their haste to leave, and he was afraid animals or vandals would have gotten into their house. When they arrived, the house looked like a tornado had gone through it. The couch was upside down. They had a very large, heavy console TV that apparently had been thrown across the room, lying in a spray of broken glass. The kitchen was trashed, the refrigerator knocked over, food everywhere. The doors to both the boys' rooms were left closed. The rooms were untouched, same as the bathroom. The master bedroom was torn apart, the pillows ripped up, feathers everywhere. The chest of drawers was knocked over, and the large mirror smashed. John's brother looked around in awe and said, "You better call the police." John looked at him and said, "Tell him what? A creature destroyed my house?" They left and closed the front door this time and drove to Dad's mill in Aberdeen. John's brother waited in the car while John went in and told this to my dad. After he was done, my dad said, "Well, let's go have a look at it then." They drove back to the house. John showed my dad the damage. He pulled the clump of hair from his shirt pocket and let my dad look at it. As they walked through the house surveying the damage, my dad pointed out the cracks in the ceiling where it apparently stood up and hit its head. John told my dad that they couldn't live there anymore. Even if the creature was gone, they would always be afraid. Their homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover the damage. The adjuster claimed that John must have done it in a drunken rage. My dad helped them find a place in Aberdeen and gave them a loan for new furniture and stuff. The house was eventually fixed up and sold, and my dad never heard about another problem there. A few observations about this encounter. My dad lost contact with John and his family in the mid-'80s. They moved out of state, and my dad hasn't heard from him since. His brother died around the same time. Why they didn't call the cops? John had a lot of pride as well as common sense. He knew he couldn't logically explain what had happened to the authorities, and he didn't want a story to get out that would have him branded as a nutcase. I asked my dad if they saved the hair. He said John never mentioned it again, and my dad never asked him about it. I asked my dad if he saw the footprint and the muddy fingerprints. He said he did. He said it looked like a giant barefoot man had stepped very carefully in the center of the mud. He's not a tracker, but he said it was the clearest print of any kind he'd ever seen. I asked my dad if the neighbors had heard any of this. He said if they did, none of them ever mentioned it again. I also asked if he thought it was possible John had made it up, that he had trashed his house in a drunken rage, and made up an elaborate cover story. My dad said John and his family were terrified of that place. They didn't even want to go back and get their clothes. If it was an elaborate story, what did he have to gain? To profit from the story in any way, you'd have to share it with people. My dad and other folks mentioned in the story are the only ones who ever heard it. Until now, of course. He also said that whatever trashed the house was no man. The TV had to weigh close to 200 pounds. It was obviously thrown across the room with great force. He said that even after 2 days, there was still a wild animal smell in that home. I asked him if he thought there may have been 2 creatures involved, considering the incident in the barn. He said he asked John the same question, and was told that John felt there was only one, that it lured him into the barn, then snuck out the side door. The thing he thought he had heard in the hayloft was either his imagination or some common animal like a raccoon. For whatever reason, this creature seemed focused on the 4-year-old. Their son was the only one who never showed any fear. It seemed to think of it as its friend, and although sex of the creature was never determined, it was referred to as a male because of the predatory stalking type behavior. That and the conspicuous lack of breasts, or perhaps it was just not as well endowed. Anyway, its behavior almost seems indicative of a mother that lost her child and is looking for a replacement. I rather asked my dad if little Timmy was a particularly hairy child, perhaps suffering from a rare condition that causes uncontrollable hair growth all over his body. He said Timmy was a normal boy with normal brown hair on a normal head. I didn't ask if Timmy regularly reeked of rotten garbage or wet dog. Didn't seem polite for the conversation. He told me of another possible creature encounter he and his crew had in the woods around Great Harbor. None of them are quite as tantalizing as the cowman story, but interesting nonetheless. There you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.